then these plastics are getting into our lungs. And there's research come out of Brazil recently that as you inhale plastics, then the plastics can get through up your nose and up and into the olfactory part of your brain, so the smell sensing part of your brain. So plastics can directly get up and into your brain, which is kind of scary. We also use plastics to package food and drink, and I know Leah and Megan are helping us reduce the plastics we come into contact with, plastics as we eat and drink on campus. And so plastics, we use them for food and drink packaging because they're wonderful materials for this, and they help us keep foods fresher for longer, which has benefits for food supply. So they're hard to displace in some instances, but it also means because they're in contact with our food that we end up eating and drinking them as well as breathing them in. And all these different types of exposure to plastics in use are some of the main health risks related to plastics in the US, where our direct exposure to plastic waste is minimal, and not too many of us are sorting through plastic trash and things like that. So most of our direct exposure to plastics is whilst we're using the plastics. And the plastics themselves, and then also the chemicals that are added to plastics, these can impact our sexual development, they can cause cancer, they can damage our brains, our neurological development and mental health. And so that's really something we should all be concerned about as we see plastics around us every day. When we look broader and out into the rest of the world, then we said that industrial scale plastic production really started in earnest around 1950. And since then, there's 9 billion tons of plastic have been produced. And because plastics persist for so long, that means that today, out in the wider world, there's about 1 ton of plastics per person on Earth, so 1 ton each. And so that is accumulating around the planet. And so beyond human health, these plastics in the environment, they're traveling through our waterways, they're in our soils, they're in the air. So even if we're outside in the world and breathing in the air, then we may be inhaling plastics, but it also means other organisms are exposed to plastics wherever they are on Earth today. Plastics are really pervasive. They've managed to get everywhere around the planet. Some of my work looks at plastics out in the middle of the ocean, so a long way from shores, out somewhere you think might be quite remote and distant from human impacts. But out there, we're finding there's more plastic carbon floating in the ocean surface than there is natural carbon, than the organisms that live there. There's more material from plastics than the living things out there. And we're starting to understand that these plastics are not just there and a nuisance and ugly. It's not just like there's litter that's we don't like the look of, but it's having negative impacts on the ecosystems out there. And it may even be reducing the ability of the ocean to take up carbon dioxide. And so the ocean, this is important because the ocean serves as a sink for 1/3 of all the carbon dioxide we emit. So we're emitting carbon dioxide when we burn fossil fuels, and that's driving the climate crisis. The ocean helps offset about 1/3 of that. So it's helping us out every day, taking up some of our waste. As we add plastics to the surface ocean, they may be modifying the way the ocean system works and impacting both the ecology of the open ocean, but also the carbon cycling of the open ocean. So in short, plastics now are recognized as a direct threat to human health in a number of different ways whilst we're using them. And then plastics waste out in the environment is degrading ecosystem and planetary health. And that's the health that we need to support us. That's the planet supporting us and ecosystem supporting us. So we need to reduce plastic use, but we can't stop using all plastic because there are many uses that are we just need them today, that for safe delivery of food, drugs, other things, the way our technology works. And so it's unlikely that we will get rid of all plastics, but we need to stop using them and throwing them away when we could use something else. And we also need to try and use them as safely as possible. So there's a group of about 40 faculty across Northeastern who are working around this topic from different angles. And so depending where discussions go today, we might be able to touch on some of those aspects as well.
That's great, Aaron. Thank you so much. It is a massive challenge, and there's some really alarming numbers that you provided there. The 1 ton of plastic per person is that's pretty scary. So Megan, I'd like to kind of go to you now and talk a little bit about what's happening at the campus level and how is Northeastern, what are we doing at a campus level to try to help, as Aaron was talking about, the importance of shifting away, especially from single-use plastics in every way that we can.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think Aaron really helped frame the problem really well there. I mean, plastic is everywhere. It's a really visible sign of environmental destruction, and a lot of our students, faculty, staff are really passionate about it. I think it's something that's really tangible that people can take action on. So we've heard a lot of interest from the Northeastern community in wanting to move away from single-use plastics, and working in the climate justice and sustainability hub. That's something that we're really passionate about as well. Just over about a year and a half ago, we had a group of faculty get together and work on a petition to move away from single-use plastic water bottles. They teamed up with some students, and students had a referendum along those same lines, really wanting to have the university rely less on these single-use plastics, so we're not contributing to the problem. So in the hub, about a year ago, we started a plastics reduction working group. That's really a collaborative effort, trying to bring a lot of the stakeholders to the table so we can think about what solutions we can be doing and working on at Northeastern. So we have a lot of those same faculty and students participating in that. Both Maria and Aaron are contributing as well, their expertise and background about how what a big problem this is and how we can be working towards those solutions. We have our business services team involved. They oversee NU dining, which clearly there's a lot of potential for plastic there. Also our food and beverage contracts. We have our recycling and materials management team involved. They clearly want to be seeing a reduction in this plastic use as well. And we also have some faculty from the business school that we've been able to work with. They want to be having their students working on solving the problem in their classes as well. So bringing together a lot of these stakeholders has helped us in starting to get to some of the solutions. We've been thinking about it both in the upstream and downstream ways. So upstream, we've been thinking about how we can provide leadership and take action in these areas. So we've been working some with our procurement team and identifying some of the areas where purchases are being made across the university, and how we can work with those stakeholders to find alternatives, whether it's reusables or different materials. We've also been working with our dining services team really closely. They've introduced a new reusable container program in the dining hall and are looking to expand that across campus more as well to get rid of more of those single-use plastics. They've also made the switch from single-use plastic cutlery to a bioplastic, which is an interim step, definitely not a solution, and I know we'll be able to get to that a little bit more on the panel. But just being able not providing those single-use plastics in our Curry Student Center has been a step in the right direction, and we're still working to get more reusables in that program as well, not just the cutlery, but plateware as well. So that's really what we want to be moving to at Northeastern, and I think that's where we can show some leadership. Also, we've been working some downstream and across the university. So we have a lot of faculty and staff sustainability committees across the university. And with those, they've been working on single-use plastics in their own departments. So we have the dining halls that have a lot of different things, but also there's all the kitchens across campus in each of the departments. So the hub has been able to provide some grants to some of these departments to purchase their own reusables. So they've been able to get that plastic cutlery and plates out of their kitchen. So that's helping as well. We also have a campus-wide Reduce, Reuse, Renew campaign and pledge. And this is our tool for really trying to influence individual behavior change. So we have those kind of more systemic solutions, but also wanting individuals to take that step and pledge not to buy plastic water bottles and use straws. So with that, we've been providing some reusable cutlery for people to take that pledge, and really encouraging them to share with their colleagues and peers, so that we can have more students and others at Northeastern moving away from single-use plastics. So definitely more that we want to be doing, but those are some steps that we've been starting in that direction, and it's been really collaborative process with all of our partners.
That's really great to hear, Megan. Thanks for sharing. I know there's a lot going on in this space, but I really like how you framed it around both sort of the upstream and the downstream efforts, and kind of pushing change through a grassroots engagement effort, as well as making those institutional changes. And I think both are really going to be important in the long run. So let's kind of keep on this thread of solutions. And John, I'm going to go to you to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing, given your work on the policy level across the country in both, state and national efforts. What's going on at this point?
Sure. Thanks, Leah, and thanks for the invitation to speak with you all this morning. So, I just kind of want to frame, the topic that we're talking about. Over the previous half century, we've really been unable to appropriately manage the complex waste stream that we have here in the U.S. And I think Maria will talk more about this, but the collective global waste management challenges are even more significant, particularly around this issue of plastics. Here in the US, we've really defaulted to recycling as our answer, because we were told that this was the sustainable way to manage a significant portion of our waste portfolio here. And for glass, paper, cardboard, and many metals, including aluminum, this is true, but it's really not so for plastics. And data has shown that anywhere between 6 and 9% of plastics are recycled annually in the US. So not great. So for decades, the plastics industry have been telling us that recycling is the answer, and we've dumped billions and billions of dollars into that system. But it hasn't really been the solution, right? We've heard that recycling is the answer, that we need better systems, we need newer technologies, and individuals need to do the right thing. They need to recycle properly and stop mucking everything up. That's what we've been told. And again, this really hasn't proven to be a successful approach. This past fall, California Attorney General Rob Bonta sued ExxonMobil. And in that lawsuit, there are allegations made based on decades of internal industry communications that recycling of plastics was never going to work, and it was never designed to work. That lawsuit alleges that industry's push for recycling was really just a public relations smokescreen that allowed for the production of more and more unnecessary plastics. So we need to look at what policy prescriptions are out there that will actually work, knowing what we currently know, and then given our past policy work and experiences. To date, a lot of the momentum has been around banning problematic single-use plastics like bags, polystyrene, straws, etc. And these are like laudable approaches, but we should still continue to do them, but they don't address the majority of the plastics that we're dealing with. And more than that, a recent national poll, actually in February of this year, that Oceana put out, revealed overwhelming support by US voters, north of 80%, for policies to reduce plastic production, to build out functional and convenient reuse and refill systems, require companies to reduce single-use packaging. So the answer then is strong policies to strong packaging and recycling infrastructure policies, also known as extended producer responsibility, or EPR. And so what EPR does is make producers legally and financially responsible for mitigating the environmental and health impacts of their products and packaging. And I just want to pause for a second and note that I mentioned health impacts of plastics, and this is an important point that I really want to drive home. Until recently, the issue and its policy prescriptions have been seen through two major lenses. First, that this is a waste management problem, and second, that it's a plastic pollution problem. That is, plastic in the environment, litter, marine debris, leakage, whatever you want to call it. But a fast emerging frame is that threat to public health. And Aaron touched on this in his opening remarks, and I'm glad he did, because we've suspected for a while that this has been an issue, but contemporary scientific research is really rocketing this concern to the front of the discussion. Plastics are made from 16,000 known chemical additives, 4,200 of which are known to be harmful to humans and or the environment, and many more that have not even been studied yet. It seems like we're seeing new studies come out every week on the linkage between plastics and public health. Researchers have found microplastics in the human heart, brain, lungs, placenta, testicles. Plastics have been linked to heart disease, obesity, endocrine system disruption, and some types of cancer. So not great stuff, right? A strong EPR policy can address all three of the associated policy problems. And so at the state level, this is really what we're pushing for. They require environmental design standards for packaging. They have mandatory reduction and recycling goals. They eliminate a number of specific toxic substances from being used in plastics production, and they direct producer fees to local governments for collection and disposal costs, reimbursement, as well as building out refill and reuse infrastructure. Now, for years, the plastics industry has opposed all these efforts, but now they see that the writing is on the wall, that public sentiment has really changed. And so they're now supporting EPR, but they're supporting very weak bills that will not functionally solve any of the problems that the strong bills address. And they also put themselves in charge of setting these program goals, milestones, and requirements. So it's the proverbial fox guarding the hen house. So our work as the advocacy community at Beyond Plastics is to really expose these weak EPR industry bills as the smokescreens they are. And the best way to do this is through strong EPR bills. Their other solution is something called chemical recycling, or what they call as advanced recycling. Now, this is a false solution. It's technology that's been around for decades, but hasn't really worked. It's still failing. The facilities across the country that do chemical recycling are closing as we speak. And these are really bad for the environment, human health, environmental justice, communities, et cetera. Just like mechanical recycling, it's a PR campaign that will allow them to plow forward with producing more single-use plastics. We could do a whole hour on chemical recycling, but if you want to learn more, Beyond Plastics released a report in fall of 2023 that's available on our website. So all of this work has become harder, as Leah mentioned, given the federal regulatory environment that has come with the new administration. So this is where state-level policymaking really becomes critical. The policy solution for the problem is twofold. First is that strong EPR bills that, in addition to all the elements I discussed earlier, expressly prohibit chemical recycling. And second is investing in building out that refill and return infrastructure to replace all of those single-use plastics, right? Safe public drinking water supplies, container washing facilities, collection systems, a strong transit system, and so on and so on. We've been focused for so long at the end of the pipe solutions, trying to figure out how to deal with all of the plastics and after they're already out in the economy and in the waste stream, and after we've been left to deal with them. And policymakers are really looking far upstream now, finally, to stop it at its source, which is really where the true policy solution lies. And that's the only way we're really going to effectively overcome this environmental and public health hazard.
Wow, what a great overview. Thank you, Jonathan. Very comprehensive. And some hope in there with some of these EPR policies moving forward. So Maria, I'd love to hear from you now on the international scale. What are you seeing? Is EPR taking off in other places around the world? Where are things progressing? Yeah, hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leah. And indeed, congratulations to the entire team on starting Sustainability Week, Sustainability Innovation Week at Northeastern. And what a great panel to start with on plastics, right? It's plastics pollution, but it's plastic use, it's plastic, it's not exchange, but substitutes, and the need to say no to plastics. So I'm Maria Ivanova. I'm the director of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs here at Northeastern. And I'm delighted to also say that I served on the delegation of the government of Rwanda when the initial resolution for a global treaty on plastic pollution was brought forward exactly 3 years ago on March 2nd in 2022. Since then, I joined Northeastern And we managed to accredit Northeastern as an observer delegation. And so I stepped down from the delegation of Rwanda and have been leading the delegation of Northeastern. And so a team of us, and several of them are here on the call, were present in the latest negotiations in South Korea, in Busan, in November. That is where a global treaty on plastic pollution, actually the resolution is on eliminating plastic pollution, was supposed to conclude, and it couldn't. And so the reasons of why we could not agree on a global treaty to end plastic pollution explain to a large extent why we have difficulties dealing with plastic pollution in the environment, with the health impacts of plastic, and with the increasing production and the inability to dispose and have effective and efficient waste management systems, as you heard from my colleagues. As Aaron pointed out, the problem is humongous. Plastic production has been growing from 1950, when this material was invented or put into place, until now. I've given a TEDx talk at MIT about the paradox of plastic. I'll put it in the chat a little bit later. But in that, I point out that something that I learned while I was preparing for that talk, plastics was a material that was invented with the goal to substitute for ivory or tortoise shell or horn, biomaterials that we used to kill animals for, because we used ivory to have piano keys, or tortoise shells for combs and other ornaments. And in 1907, I believe, there was the patent of bakelite, the first synthetic material to actually replace plastics. And it has taken off. From the 1950s, the hockey stick of graph of plastic production is really visible. And today, we produce over 460 million tons of plastic every single year. And that is more than the weight of all human beings combined. More than the weight of all human beings on Earth combined annually. So what do we do with it, right? Jonathan was saying the industry, the government has always individualized responsibility. It's up to us to reduce, to reuse, to recycle. And yet only 9% of plastics globally has been recycled or is being recycled. At the same time, we are bombarded with images and advertisements and a narrative of, oh yes, you have to drink, you have to get hydrated, take that bottle of water. I will never look at a bottle of water the same way. After doing some research on it, in a liter plastic bottle, there are 240,000 detectable plastic fragments. One plastic water bottle, 1 liter. Those all go into our bodies. Both Aaron and Jonathan noted the health impacts that we are now seeing, and yet we have not had solutions, responses by policymakers, whether at the local level, the national level, or at the global level. Granted, the global level now is more difficult than ever. Multilateralism is critical. Yes, the recycling industry in this country felt the impacts of China saying, we are not going to take your plastic waste for recycling anymore. So what happened to the recycling industry? And I would love to have a discussion with Jonathan a little bit about that, because that was a policy decision. by China. So it's an international policy decision. We are not going to take waste from the United States or other developed countries to process in our countries. Now, those ships of plastic waste have now moved to other parts of Asia that will take our waste. And yet we are still to think about how do we reduce our consumption? How do we improve our management of that waste? The decision has to be global, but at the moment, the governments are facing severe difficulties in agreeing on what those decisions are. And this boils down to indeed the scope of what needs to be done. Is it a waste management issue? Is it an environmental pollution issue? Or is it a health issue? And governments are requesting science and studies for all of those concerns, but they're also asking, what are the innovative policy responses? A global treaty on plastics, as I mentioned, was proposed in 2022. Two small states, Rwanda and Peru, were the ones that put it forward at the UN Environment Assembly in March of that year. 5 rounds of negotiations have been completed, and no agreement has been reached because there are 2 camps, so to speak. There's the High Ambition Coalition, led by Rwanda and Norway, that says plastic has to be stopped at the source. We have to stop producing primary plastic polymers. The other side is the like-minded countries, led by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, Bahrain, oil-producing states that say we cannot survive without this primary production of polymers because our economies are dependent on fossil fuels, and plastics are 98% fossil fuels. And so it's been very difficult to reach an agreement between these 2 camps, the High Ambition Coalition and the like-minded countries that focus on the primary production or on the waste management side. Now, my argument and that of a group of us who are working in this space is we need leadership from the middle out to bring those 2 visions or those 2 positions together to solve the problem of plastic pollution and the impacts on the human body. We need leadership from cities, from companies, and campuses. And this is especially true today when the federal government in this country just issued an executive order, bring plastic straws back, bring plastics back. So we need to have leadership from the city, whether it's the city of Boston, or it's the city of New York, or it's the city of San Antonio, Texas. We need leadership from companies. And you see at the international negotiations that there are 2 groupings of business. There's the business of fossil fuel production and chemical production, and there are the brands. Those are the Coca-Colas and the Nestle's, those that are impacted by consumer behavior. And so what we can do as the campuses, that very critical space, is we can produce more of the science that shows the health impacts or the environmental impacts.
How you doing?
Also change minds. We can change the behavior of individuals so that we can trigger the collective action that is necessary. And whether we do it as our power of procurement through having sustainability policies on campus, or we do it through our research, through our engagement in policy efforts from the state to the global level, or through the arts. This is one area that we have started at the Policy School of Arts and Policy. And we know that people's minds don't change simply by facts. They change through feelings. And thank you all for coming here today from all parts, different parts from Boston and beyond, and look forward to a conversation about how to deal with this pervasive problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And again, for highlighting, I like that kind of middle out approach to change management. I think that's really strategic and critical given the landscape that we're in at many different levels of the world. So we've heard a bit about false solutions, and I want to kind of dig into that for a minute here. First, the first false solution, it sounds like, was recycling, not effective at managing and resolving the problem. And then, Jonathan, you talked about chemical recycling as another false solution. And then Megan, you also touched upon bioplastics as a potential false solution. And that's the one that I would love to dig in. I think there's a lot of questions and confusion around bioplastics, compostable plastics. So yeah, what about bioplastics? Are these respectable alternatives or regrettable solutions? And maybe we'll start with you, Aaron. Are they any healthier for us?
Yeah, so I guess coming from the scientific side, it's always good to understand what things are and have clear language around things so we know what we're talking about. And so bioplastics can be used in different ways. The word can be used in different ways. So bioplastic, most in the literature, would generally be used as plastics that are made from biological materials instead of from fossil fuels. But then there's also an overlap with that class of plastics that are not made from fossil fuels with plastics that may be biodegradable, that might break down in the environment and therefore not accumulate and last so long. And so there's a good distinction to draw there, because you could make polyethylene, which is a non-biodegradable plastic, from biomaterials. You'd normally make it from fossil fuels, but you could make exactly the same plastics instead of from fossil fuels with another feedstock, a plant. You could make it from that. And then chemically in the environment, that's going to be exactly the same plastic, even though it would be a bioplastic. And then there's the compostable and biodegradable plastics, which there are different classifications around those, which are sometimes misleading or sometimes poorly categorized. And so compostable, that can be truly compostable, where you could put it in the garden and you could leave it in the soil, or you could mix it in with your compost in the garden if you had some, and it would degrade and it would form a nutrient-rich substrate with your other organics, leaves from the garden. But it may just be that it may only be compostable if you take it to an industrial facility with the same label. And so that might mean heat needs to be applied. Maybe a chemical reaction needs to be applied to get it to convert to something that you could use as compost. And so these classifications today are not well defined, and that leaves the consumer and us, they're confused about what things are. There's a lot of mislabeling and unclear information about products. And so that would be something that would be really valuable for industry and legislation to take hold of, is like correctly labeling things and even telling us what additives are in plastics too, because you may find a piece of plastic that you could compost it. It would look like it turned into compost, and it would make a plant grow, and you could add it to the soil. But if it had some toxic additives in there, those additives are going to end up in the plant that you grow in it, and you're going to end up eating those toxins. And so labeling of the additives as well as the polymer need to be included in plastics, just like we'd expect them to be for anything else that we're going to consume. And so those are sort of part of the issues around bioplastics.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the repercussions of that with PFAS in our compost waste streams and the challenges that that's caused. So yeah, any other thoughts from the rest of the panel on this?
No, Aaron hit most of, I think, the concerns around toxics, around production, around contamination. And the other thing I do want to bring up is that we refer at Beyond Plastics, we refer to it as a regrettable substitution, because you're not actually changing. A lot of this is a behavior change as well. Like, we have this culture of convenience that we're all used to, right? And so by going from traditional fossil fuel based plastics to bioplastics, which Aaron said, as Aaron said, like, what is a bioplastic? There's no standard definition for that. So first of all, it's greenwashing. It's super resource intensive. And we're not, the answer is to reduce those single-use plastics at their source and then replace them with this reuse and refill infrastructure. And by going to bioplastics, that is not doing that. You're just using one single-use item, or you're substituting one single-use item for another single-use item. And we have a great fact sheet about this. I'll put that in the chat if people want to read more on bioplastics.
Right. If I can just jump in very quickly, I put something in the chat. Is the bioplastics also the biodegradable? And this is something I think, Megan, you shared with us in the sustainability conversations about balloons. And that there is no such thing as biodegradable balloons. And there's an article of scientists who actually carried out experiments of what happens with what has been labeled as and sold as biodegradable balloons. They never biodegraded.
Yeah, I think this just really gets at the point of why we are all really focused on that reduce and reuse, and there's not the recycle or that end solution. So at Northeastern, I think that's why we are really trying to move towards reusables as much as possible, but recognizing it does take some time, and with these interim steps, not interim solutions, it's a way to get people thinking about it and having that conversation. But just, I think reusables is really the best option for sure. Or different alternatives. In the case of balloons, we don't need balloon decorations at all events, but we could have some plants or other things. So that's another area where we work with several different sustainability committees across campus, just trying to brainstorm some of those things. A lot of people have thought about that, but maybe don't have the resources to come up with the solution. So that's where we might try to find some funding for some of those, but other people haven't thought about it as much. So just bringing these ideas to the table is something that all the partners involved in the collaboration are working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also a nice connection here to the policy piece. When you talk about, Aaron, I think you brought it up, the need for better labeling and policies that are setting clear definitions around what is the definition of a bioplastic versus a biodegradable plastic, and what are the implications of both. I know that's something we struggled with on an operations level when we're saying, oh, we're switching to these compostable utensils, and then our waste haulers like, we can't take those. So there's lots of challenges, and having some policy framework that helps really establish some standards for these things could be really helpful. So as thinking about policy, I think Jonathan, you talked a little bit about how the role of public opinion has actually helped push and drive some changes in the way that industry is responding to these issues, which I think is a really positive thing. And that also has helped led to some policy changes around EPR. And while they're not the full solutions that we need, it is starting to move the needle a bit. So I'd love to hear from any of you on how we think about this connection between individual change and I think there's probably a lot of people on this call who are passionate about this issue and are trying to remove plastic from their lives. Is that effective in driving some of the sort of systemic change that we needed, and how do those things kind of interact with each other?
I'll jump in here, Leah, since I'm the director of the policy school, and this is what we think about, this tension, but also complementarity between individual action and collective action. And policies are about collective action, but ultimately collective action is about changing the behavior of individuals. And so through a policy, we can change the behavior of individuals just with a stroke of a pen. For example, one of the international negotiations was held in Paris a couple of years ago. And usually, imagine getting on an airplane. What do you get? You get a plastic cup, you get plastic cutlery, you get plastic trays, you get plastic absolutely everything. And on that Air France flight, going for the plastics negotiations in Paris, there was nothing plastic. There were no trays. They'd actually just bring the food without a tray. The cutlery was bamboo or real washable steel cutlery. There were no plastic cups. And that happened because the government said, we just outlaw this. And you go into a supermarket in France, the vegetables are not covered individually in plastic or in cellophane or in styrofoam trays. And so you need that type of a collective, a policy to actually induce collective action. But at the same time, you need the individual action to be able to say no to certain products and to drive that change forward. So in the policy school here at Northeastern, we have changed the swag. And so rather than giving t-shirts or sweatshirts or pens, we do a set of bamboo cutlery. It doesn't even say Northeastern on it, but you can put it in your backpack, and everywhere you go, you will have your bamboo cutlery with you. That's an individual choice. It's individual action. However, it is driven by a collective decision to do that as procurement, to give that to people rather than to leave them to their own individual choices.
And I just want to, build off of that. I think Maria is absolutely right. There's that collection and that collective and that individual. And from my perspective, the work that I do, in various states, connecting individual actions to those policies is really critical. And so people ask me, what can I do individually to reduce my plastic impact? And of course, I always say like the normal things: bamboo cutlery, a reusable water bottle, a reusable coffee cup. But the single most important thing I think that an individual can do to drive change is to be civically engaged and to reach out to their lawmakers and say, hey, look, we know what the policy solutions are for this on the systemic level, or at least the statewide level, and this is what I would like you to do to solve this problem. I think that is just as critical, if not more so, than the individual cutting out, carrying a reusable bag and things like that. So it is a yes and question, right? Yes, you should do all of this stuff, and you should vote with your wallet, or as they say, but you also need to have that civic engagement piece be part of the solution, because I know that lawmakers are hearing from lobbyists and individuals who are cutting checks and talking to them about false solutions or incomplete solutions, and so they also need to be hearing from people. But that people power is such a critical piece of advocacy work, and that grassroots approach is super critical. So they need to hear that, and so I think that is a really important piece. And so if anybody, is looking for something that they could do individually today, it is to pick up the phone or email a legislator, a lawmaker, and say, hey, here's the solution. We know what the solutions are, and I want you as my representative to vote to solve this through policy.
And Jonathan, I would say that this also extends to the institution we're part of, which is a university that actually has tremendous purchasing power and the power to change behavior.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I would say we have a student sustainability committee that meets monthly, and they actually have a meeting tonight. But our February meeting was focused on local advocacy and making your voice heard, because I agree. I think that is really what needs to happen and is the most effective solution. Another thing we've talked about with the plastics reduction group, as I mentioned, we worked with some faculty from the business school, and they were really focused on kind of the marketing efforts. And so we had some students do some research, and they came up with some great ideas about how to get the word out about plastics reduction with their peer. But one of the things that they really found was that peer influence is one of the most important things. It needs to be, you want to stay with the social norms. So if everyone's carrying their water bottle, if everyone's avoiding plastic, and they found through their research that peer influence boosts sustainability actions by 70%. So they spent a lot of time thinking about, what are some of the tactics to make it really visible at Northeastern, and show that we're not using plastic. So that's something we've been trying to bring into our Reduce, Reuse, Renew campaign as well, just bringing up that visibility.
Absolutely. So long as people don't try to keep up with the rapidly evolving trends in reusable water bottles, also a challenge. So I would happy to open it up to questions from the audience here. Feel free to raise your hand and unmute, and you can just unmute yourself, or you can welcome to put questions in the chat if that works better for you. Otherwise, I'm happy to. I have plenty more questions too, but just want to make sure that we're hearing from folks on the call. Go ahead.
I have a question to the audience, and
okay, great.
Put in the chat. But I mean, there's so many people come from places outside of Northeastern. I noticed when you put in the chat who is who. It would be great to know what your institution is doing. What are you encountering in terms of successes or obstacles, for that matter? How do we learn from examples that haven't worked? So feel free to even write in the chat or share with us.
That's a great question. Yeah, looks like we have folks from University of Rhode Island, City of Seattle. So feel free, Drexel University. I'd love to hear from you all.
People are a bit shy, I guess. But
I guess so. Well, the final question, Pat.
Say hi. I had the opportunity to visit Northeastern over the late summer. I was in Boston for some meetings and such, and went to campus and even included it in my little LinkedIn post on my trip. And I was very pleased to see so many durable dishware options in the food service facility on campus. I'm curious, how long is that? Is it just the case that Northeastern never went away from durables and it wasn't a difficult transition back to a durable dishware, or did you have to go through a process where single use had taken over and you had to reintroduce maybe at some point? Because that's a lot of units every day displacing single use, and some of the units are plastic, and so we can maybe hear more from Jonathan or others about that, like durable plasticware, and what's the difference there. But first, the story about Northeastern's history with durables and single use. Curious. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So in our dining halls, we've had durables. There was some single use in the COVID times, but and everyone taking everything to go. But now we have the reusable container program, so we don't have those single use to goes anymore. So that's been great in the dining halls. The area that we're really focusing on right now is our Curry Student Center, which does have all items to go right now. And that is either, some of them are compostable, some of them are recyclable, a lot of them are just garbage. It's different vendors, different contracts. So it's definitely something that we're really starting to work through. But we are looking to bring more reusables to that location, hopefully starting this summer, and really being able to have more of an option for a dine-in option. So people would be able to sit and enjoy their food, return everything. There wouldn't have to be like any checking out of anything. It would just be the standard that people would be able to do that. And then even when people do want to take things to go, there'd be a surcharge for that. So people would have, it'd be the visibility that, okay, you want a single-use item, well, you'll have to pay for that. There is a cost to those items. So we're working towards those programs and really wanting to have some leadership in that realm for the university there.
Thank you, Megan.
So
And,
did Boston,
oh, go ahead.
The real quick, Boston University does have that. You probably know, Megan. They have I think it's $2 to use the single use. And so it forces everybody, all consumers, just choose durable because of money. But then they also have a wonderful point of sale, system where it all resides upon a platform for tracking inventory, which is, it's an investment to make, and it's a transition maybe in the student cards and stuff like that. But it certainly provides, in their instance, a huge participation in the reusables to go as well as dine in.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, we work really closely with them. So I've gotten a few ideas here and there, but are looking to do really similar things with that. The cups is another area where we need to do a little bit more work on. We've been looking into kind of what more of the cup options are. And I know Seattle's had a lot of success in that, particularly at events and having those reusable cups, but that's something we are looking more into here as well.
So this kind of brings me to the question, and Pat, you were getting at this. Replacing single-use plastics with a durable plastic or a reusable plastic, concerns?
I mean, I would say the only real concern is what is that durable plastic made of, right? And so, in my previous role as the state director at Clean Water Action, we worked directly with in Rhode Island. We worked directly with restaurants to try to get them off of single-use disposables and onto reusables, things that could go through the dishwasher, et cetera. And a lot of those are made of durable plastics. And I think a lot of the to-go boxes and returnable, reusable, takeaway containers are durable plastics, and those are fine. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a toxicologist, I'm not a chemical engineer, but some plastics are better than others. Some have fewer additives. So if it's a clean-ish durable plastic, that's fine. If you're looking at black plastic, things that are made of black plastic that are alleged to be reusable, excuse me, those can be problematic. And so, I mean, this gets back to the conversation we had around compostability, is that there's no real standards for what goes into these things, and labeling things durable or safe or whatever. So if a company says something is food safe, what does that mean? So something to think about, but generally, the clearer the plastic, the better it is. It's not a great answer, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. I mean, there's other materials like aluminum and stainless steel. Glass is good too, except it's super breakable. But there's definitely other materials out there. But for all intents and purposes, durable plastics are going to be better. But we should be mindful of what those resins are, just for a public health angle.
I'll jump in on this just to give an example that a primary school in rural Rwanda made the move from reusable, washable plastic plates to metal plates, to stainless steel plates. And I mean, it's rural Rwanda. It's not a place where you have a lot of money to spend to actually change your entire inventory. But they said it is better for the health of the kids for us not to wash the plastic plates in dishwashers, and all of the cooking and then the serving of the food now happens in stainless steel plates.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And it looks like we have a question from Rod.
Sorry, I'm trying to do my video so I can say, hi, everybody. Thank you for this. It's very, very interesting. I'm at the University of Rhode Island. So I don't have a question. I just thought I'd make a contribution. So we know Jonathan he's an alma mater of our our program here. So on campus, we do have sustainability initiatives. We also have efforts to try to reduce single-use plastics. There is an academic research and teaching and focus area on plastics called Plastics Land to Sea at the university. One of the things that Kathy DeCesare and I do, and she's also on this Zoom call, is we teach courses in applied history and policy. So we look at the role of history in helping us understand public policy issues and help to try to come to better public policy decisions. And we looked a little bit at plastics, echoing what Maria said. The history of plastics is very, very interesting. Its origins are very different from its outcomes. We also look at the history of petrochemicals in the country, looking at the way that the petrochemical companies have shaped the discussion, which is also illuminative for the public policy discussions that we're all engaged in. The other thing that we do, we look at trends, historical trends, and analogs. One of the series of analogs that we've looked at is what causes populations, particularly the American population, to change its mind about environmental issues. So we look at things like changes in attitudes after the Denora smog from 1948. We look at changes in attitude after the Cuyahoga River fire from 1969, the Santa Barbara oil spill in 1969, Love Canal in 1978. There's some analogs, there's some ways in which people change their minds that are triggered by specific things that happened in each of those. It's somewhat similar and akin to the famous picture of the sea turtle with a straw in its nostril that caused public attitudes to change a little bit. And so so we look at the ways in which history can contribute to these discussions, and it can be quite illuminating. So I don't think I've really got a question. I just thought I'd make a contribution.
Really appreciate it, Rod. Thank you. And some great parallels and lessons learned there. So perhaps we can all kind of connect more offline. Well, it is the end of the hour. So that was an incredible session. Thank you all so much for joining us. And again, please tune in for other great events coming up this week. Again, putting the link in the chat there. And thank you to our panelists. There's some incredible work happening, and I just love to see this connection between research, policy, behavior, action, institutional, individual, all kind of coming together to move the needle. We really need more of this. So have a wonderful afternoon and happy Sustainability Innovation Week.
Thank you. Thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Leah.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leah.